investigators were cheating our babies, right?
That is correct.
Can you tell the judge, if you remember, about how many children were there in the Atlanta public school system during this time period? We're talking about 2010, 2011.
Around 47,000 students, somewhere in that range.
47,000 students.
Mm-hmm.
And how many employees?
Took over 6,000 employees at that time.
6,000 employees. So can you tell the judge, would you, as superintendent, have talked to the special investigators, even without the board directing you to do so?
I would have talked to the special investigators because it was just as much my desire to find out what was going on as anybody else.
Right. In fact, Hall, it was just the right thing to do.
It was.
The board didn't have to tell you to go down there and talk to Mike Bowers and Bob Wilson. You would have done it anyway, right?
I would have done it.
And so really, when you tell Mr. Dean in response to these questions that, hey, you know, I was fearful that I would be terminated, I would lose my job if I didn't cooperate with these investigators, I mean, you would have done it anyway, right?
I would have done it, but I also knew that it was a directive from the board, and I absolutely was clear that there would be a consequence if I did not.
Yeah, but the consequence is not what drove you to do it. It was superintendent. You wanted to get at the truth, right?
That is correct.
And you would have helped these investigators get to the bottom of who or if cheating was going on with these babies, whether the board told you to do it or not, right?
That is correct.
Now, let me ask you this. Did you believe at the time that there was a widespread cheating problem within the Atlanta public school system?
Upon receiving the BRC report, they clearly noted that there were 12 schools in Category 1 and 108 employees. It was clear to me that there was a problem that needed further investigation in order to hold people accountable. If an employee were found during the, after we had done due diligence through the due process hearings, they would have been terminated.
Okay.
If they were found to have cheated, they would have been terminated.
So like for instance, if you found out that a principal confessed during his interview with special investigators that he directed teachers to change answers or that they themselves changed answers, what happens?
And that was found to be a legitimate confession.
Right.
During the hearing, they would be terminated.
Terminated. But even if they confessed to the investigators and you found out about the confession, you know, and just give an example, if a principal talks to Bob Wilson, they confess, they name teachers, they give him all the information, Bob picks up the phone and calls you and says, listen, Dr. Hall, this is what we got. Can you tell us whether or not the next day you sit down with Belita Mazik, y'all write up a proposal, and that principal is terminated immediately?
Again, we would have to give the principal an opportunity to respond to the charges, and if we find out that indeed that occurred, then that principal will be terminated, but they are all entitled to a due process hearing. The point being, when you're hired, you agree to a lot of things. You agree to a certain standard of dress, let's say. But there comes a time when you observe that this standard is not really being met. Time to say to everyone, and that certainly isn't, in any way a parallel to this very, very serious situation. But I use that to illustrate there comes a time when no matter what you signed when you came in, you have to be reminded that this policy exists and there are serious consequences to not following. reference one of the exhibits that you have there, where the board,
Okay.
for the first time during my tenure, hired external counsel to review their contract with me.
Is that number 9, I think?
Just give me a minute, and I'll tell you. Okay, exhibit 9, yes. The stakes were very high here for the Board of Education, for the system, for all the employees. And for the first time, in the 12 years of my employment, the board decided to hire outside counsel to review my contract. Clearly, that was very different from the atmosphere in which I operated up until then. And so clearly, it became evident to me that there was a faction of the board who felt that termination was an option.
Let me ask you this. That's how you felt.
And so I felt.
And the evidence of that kind of is seen in Defense Exhibit number 9, which is this press release from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution.
Yes, that summarizes what was taking place at that time.
Okay. You felt like the board was looking at your contract and that you could be subject to termination. Is that right?
Yes.
Now let me just ask you this. Did you personally change any answer sheets for any child from wrong to right in the 2009 CRCT? And I don't mean that to be facetious, but I do want to ask you.
I did not.
You did not. And when you spoke to the special investigators, you didn't admit to doing anything like that.
Absolutely not.
Right. Did you direct others, executive directors, any of the higher echelon, the principals that you met with regularly, assistant principals, testing coordinators, teachers, anybody within the system, did you direct them to change answers, to improve scores, so the Atlanta public school system would look good and everybody would get a bonus? Did you do that?
No.
Did you admit to doing anything like that when you spoke to the special investigators?
No.
Right. So help me understand this. What was it you were afraid that you would be terminated for if you hadn't done that?
There is a clause in my contract that you were, that Mr. Dean drew our attention to, or drew my attention to, that there is, the board can actually terminate me unilaterally without cause. And the board is a political entity. And given what was going on with the Board of Education, they could do it
For what?
without cause. They don't
Without
owe me
cause.
an explanation.
Don't owe you an explanation?
No, they don't.
And you felt like that's what would happen to you?
I felt that that was a possibility, given what was going on with this particular situation.
Okay.